Good morning and welcome to this review for Key Out of Time by Andre Norton. So I've had this book for a while. Andre Norton is a bit of a mood read for me. I need to be in the right mood. This is an ace, one of the later books. It's got some pretty cool cover art. It's unfortunately been reduced in price at some shocking shop that then stapled a hole through the cover. Not the best of condition, not the worst of condition. Do quite like the artwork. I don't think the artwork is credited here anywhere. I didn't see it when I was having a quick roam through the covers. Nope, doesn't seem to. Tell me if you know who did the painting. It's an unusual one for Norton because a lot of her ace books are very animal oriented, and this is just this rather nice, we're gonna say, impressionistic cover. Okay, so I made notes for this one because it took me a long time to read. While it is not a large book, I don't find Norton a fast read by any means. And let's start with a word about Norton, by the way. So Andre Norton was born in the early 1900s. I'm going to say 1912. I might be incorrect about that. And Andre Norton is, of course, the pseudonym, the primarily used pseudonym for Alice Mary Norton. She had other ones, including Andre Norton and Andre North. And I think I had an Andre North book at one stage, but no more. So Andre Norton published her first book in the late 40s, 1947 quite possibly. So let's pause here to think. She died in the early 2000s. She was writing in the 40s. What does that tell you about her style of writing? It should tell you a few things. The older writers often do require a bit of patience. Every now and then you'll encounter a writer who wrote in the 40s or 50s and it might have been written yesterday, and that's amazing, but it's rare. Most of them, elements to their writing style have dated. I am fond of Andre Norton. I first got a couple of her books before I was even a teenager. The first 3 of the Witch World series. I still have 2 of them. And I read and reread them. She was incredibly influential in the genre, the early SFF, back when SFF won the same shelf in the bookstore. Probably along with horror as well. I think it was science fiction, fantasy, horror. No one knew quite what to do with any of those, and they were all in there together, and often within the same covers. And so, Andre Norton, yes. She was very influential. She wasn't a prolific publisher, but she published quite a few. Key Out of Time, which I've put down. There we are. Key Out of Time is actually part of a time traveler series. I forget the name of the series. I've got it written down here somewhere. She collaborated with a lot of other authors as well. Marion Zimmer Bradley, Rosemary Edgell, Mercedes Lackey, all the ones that were active in fantasy at that stage. For magic, no, it wasn't magic. It was further down. Okay, she's got a time traveler sequence series. And Time Traders, Ross Murdock being one of the 2 main characters in this one. So there were 4 of them, and this was the 4th of the ones that were written early, between 1958 and 1963. This was 1963. After that, there was a long hiatus, and in 1994, she wrote one collaborating with someone else. And then in the 90s, there was another, and then in the 2000s. So I think it's fair to say that this was an early quartet, and this is the last one. Certainly it ends on a last story of the saga type feel. Where was I? I lost track. Oh yes, Andre Norton. She was a Grand Gandalf wizard. She was incredibly influential. She won a whole heap of awards, well deserved, for her innovative fantasy and storylines. And she is credited with quite possibly writing the very first fantasy based on D&D, which is a huge industry these days and has been for a couple of decades. But apparently she was invited to play a Greyhawk game. I've never played in the Greyhawk universe, but I think it's a Greyhawk. And based on that one, she wrote a fantasy novel, a fantasy fiction, swords and sorcery, something like that novel. And it was the first Greyhawk book and quite possibly the first D&D book. So I thought that was a bit of an interesting trivia for you. When you go to that trivia session where they're asking you all about SFF, as if that's ever going to happen. Okay, I can totally see that she wouldn't be for everyone. Her writing is formal, it's stylized, it's not heavily emotive, and the main characters, they don't zing with brilliance. They're more of a vehicle for the story. She often falls down on fighting scenes. I like a good fighting scene. I don't think she writes them terribly well. She's got it all mapped out and concept, but she doesn't seem to be carried away with the adrenaline rush of a fight like some authors are, and they carry you along. Norton, unfortunately, doesn't do that. And since there usually are fight scenes in her more science fiction type stories, that's a bit of a shame. Still, it is what it is. No one's perfect. In this story, Ross Murdock and Gordon Ash are two time core travelers, hardcore time core travelers. And what I didn't know, because nowhere on this book suggests it, is that it is a number 4 in a series. And so the beginning of it, there's a fair amount of exposition. The bad guys in this book have been set up in previous books, and the two main characters of Ross Murdock and Gordon Ash have as well. In this book, they have accompanied settlers on a spaceship for the purposes of settling this new world, which they have called something in Hawaiian that I can't pronounce. Kawawaya? So apparently it means heaven in Hawaiian. Anyway, the settler mix here are a lot of Polynesians, Samoans, and Hawaiians. And our third most important character is actually a Polynesian woman who swims with dolphins. You didn't think Andre Norton would leave us without any animals at all, did you? No. So she's got 2 dolphins. Like David Brin's Uplift series, these are dolphins that collaborate with humans in the water. They've got superior senses. They can telepathically communicate, not audibly communicate, with their handlers. And our main man, Ross Murdock, has got a bit of a chip on his shoulder. It might be a forest, but it's at least a chip about the fact that he's the only one on the team who can't telepathically communicate easily. That's a theme that runs all the way through, but it does come in handy when they meet aliens who try to mind control them. Spoiler, not a big one. Okay, so our time core travelers have accompanied the settlers to this particular water world, and I love the water world, and I love the descriptions of the underwater expeditions and the underwater dragon and swimming with dolphins. I love the fact of a mask that you just slip over your face like an alien face sucker, and then you can breathe underwater. Bring on that technology, I say. They're exploring it in the belief, based on some maps that they've found in a previous book, that there would have been a galactic civilization settled on this world at one time. It's through these captured maps that they knew that there was a world here. The world that they reach doesn't configure to the same land masses that the original map described, however, and they're trying to find the perfect place to set up this time scoop. It goes back in time over a series. I think they're starting at 10,000 to try and find the civilization and see more about it. They don't even know at this stage it's like what alien race was in control of the civilization, but they have reason to believe that there was some. Eventually they find these depressions in the ocean that correspond to things they can see on their time snoop, but they can't find out enough. So Gordon Ash, who's the head of this expedition, says they're going to put up a time gate, they're going to go through the time gate in physical person and do a little bit of a reconnaissance and then come back. That cunning plan fails because as he sets up the gate and he's trialing it, some huge backwash comes through it and it sucks Gordon Ash, Ross Murdock, our primary narrator or the guy we follow around, what's her name, Kawa, unpronounceable Polynesian lady who talks with dolphins, and the dolphins, and they're all sucked through back in time to the world as it was. And when they come through, there's this immense storm happening. There's a castle on the cliff. Ross Murdock sees people on the shore with lights trying to save survivors of the ships that are wrecking on the reef. And I'm going, even in the 60s, we knew about wreckers. And yes, they are wreckers, and they are killing people who come to shore. So separated from his friends, it's this oceanic battle for Ross Murdock to get back together with them, which he does eventually, and they slowly start trying to find Ash, who's the last member of the party. This pursuit sends them up to the castle. It has them making contacts with various friends from the different communities on this world, and they do finally reunite. I quite like the story of this world. I did enjoy the individual elements. I didn't think it flowed particularly well, and I did think that it relied a little bit too heavily on saying, well, these baldies are the bad guys, and they're the bad guys because we met them in a previous book. I don't know how you'd get away from that. It's like there's a bit of an info dump at the beginning to catch us up on what has happened in the series previously. But overall, I'm not sure that you can get around the fact that the fourth in the series is going to be some downsides. I do wonder too if at this point Norton wasn't just a little bit tired of these characters and ready to move on to something else. So pros and cons of this book. For me, the pros are the water world, the Polynesian influence. We do get bits of their culture and mythology and stuff coming in, and the characters speaking to the dolphins, of course. It was nice having a secondary character as female character. I was shocked just a decade or so ago to find out that Andre Norton was actually a woman. Not because I've got any problem with women being part of the original SFF movement, because Norton almost always writes young males as her primary character, and she doesn't write women very well at all. It's like the woman here is a bit of a con, because as a secondary character to whom Ross feels some animosity that is never pinpointed, the way she's written feels patriarchal, which I suppose Norton, born in the early 1900s, I suppose she was a product of a patriarchal society, and there's no reason why that wouldn't come through. The pros, good adventure. There's a lot of Deus Ex Machina, I guess, in the way our characters find themselves get themselves out of issues, and in the way they win the battle against the bad guys, which they kind of do. You've got among them numerous races that inhabit this world. Is one that are older, they're a dying race, they've got all this technology that comes across as magic, and Norton actually makes a reference to that inside the book. It's like, if you come across technology that is so far in the future, it might as well be magic. This feels magical, and it feels mystical. Andre Norton likes adding a mystical element to her books. It isn't obnoxious here, but there is a strong mystical element. Not overtly strong, but it's there. The Deus Ex Machina fizzled, I've got to say, for me at least a little bit. I didn't hate the story. I didn't love the story. I would probably only revisit the story if I happened to come across the other time travelers and read them in sequence, and this one as the last of its era on the way to the more modern ones. I could do that if I came across them all. Again, Andre Norton, not for everyone. But when I'm in the mood, she very much fills that early science fiction fantasy gap that there aren't that many authors that write from that era, I think, science fiction with such a heavy load of fantasy. I could be wrong. Actually, there's a few other ones. But anyway, Key Out of Time, Andre Norton, I did enjoy. Would I recommend? Some people who like the early classic SFF with a fair dose of fantasy, yes. If you enjoy Marion Zimmer Bradley, Darkover series and so forth, I think probably Andre Norton is more for you. The writing styles are a bit more similar, and they certainly meshed in Black Trillium. So maybe if Julian May is your thing, Andre Norton's style will also be your thing. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Read good books.